what if we engineered, space hearts, let's call them, that are not designed to function on Earth. Our heart has a structure and a geometry that works because,
of gravity.
But maybe in microgravity, you would need a rounder heart.
Hello, everyone. This is the Space Cafe podcast, and I'm Marcus. So how will we live out there in space once the time comes? This is one of the most pressing questions I keep asking because I'm so deeply convinced that we're getting closer and closer to making it up there and setting up shop out there. No matter how long it takes till we get our big rockets out there or back again. I know it's kind of tricky at the moment still, but you'll see. This is just transition period, and at some point we'll make it. And then we will need to ask the questions, how will we live out there? What will life be like out there? When there is no up and down in zero gravity, when there is no left and right, and no need for furniture or rooms or traditional things that we're used to having down here on Earth. What will this space life be like? And I sat down with none other than space architect Pnam Bagley, a very prominent figure in the space community and way beyond the space community. And she would be the one you would go to if you wanted to set up shop out there and find out what you should order, what kind of house you should order. But jokes aside, if you've ever asked what life out there will be like, or more importantly, who you will become out there, this episode is exactly for you. So grab your cosmic latte and enjoy this conversation with Pnam Bagley. Let's go.
If money was not an issue, what in space would you want to build or make happen?
If money was not an issue and time was, condensed, so it would happen in my lifetime, I think a O'Neill ring would be really cool, which is this very, very large scale ring in which we can create artificial gravity and have entire cities, perhaps countries, live within.
Is this what we know from Space Odyssey, like that wheel?
Yeah. Even bigger, actually.
Bigger?
Yeah.
Like how big?
So it was a concept put together by Gerard O'Neill many decades ago about how to possibly export humanity off of this earth, and there are many reasons you'd want to do that. One is kind of like the overpopulation that's of humans on this planet is starting to make the whole equation of resources versus needs for power and food and things like this a little bit difficult. So having a very, very large scale kind of like structure in space that will allow for.
It's like a city in space.
Pretty much, yeah. So what was that movie with Matt Damon that came out a few years ago? Elysium.
Yes.
Elysium was an O'Neill.
Where you live on the inside?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would that be feasible? Is this just a matter of funding?
So, in theory, it should be possible. Obviously, there are many types of tests, like artificial gravity has never been tested before. I believe that VAST is going to do a very small version of it very soon in the next couple of years, where I believe they're going to rotate a mini space station at 0.04 times what the Earth's gravity is.
They announced to launch next year, but now are delaying it, I think.
Yeah,
they announced sort of a miniature space station.
Yeah, so that's Haven 1.
Yes, exactly.
So Haven 1 is going to launch first. I believe they're going to have 4 commercial spaceflight participants in it, not professional astronauts. And then they'll have Haven 2. And I can't remember which one is going to be the one that features the artificial gravity, but they are the first one who are going to try it. Yeah.
It's obvious to to rotate something. But is there a problem entailed with it?
Well, we never tested it, right? There's a lot of things that physically and mechanically sound plausible, but like anything in space, you don't know until you try.
Exactly.
And then the minute you put humans in these kind of environments, it heightens the stakes of like the safety of the whole thing, right? Because it's not just like rotating the thing, it's making sure that all the hardware, software, and human systems work together to make sure that it's safe enough for humans to be there.
It still feels like we're building very much for the way we're building things on Earth. We have rooms, the science fiction movies I keep remembering. They look like a room down here on Earth with tables and chairs. Is there a way to rethink all this and rebuild humans to meet the needs of space?
I think it's going to be a happy medium. On one side, we have to create interior design and space environments that are conducive to living in space. So when you live in microgravity, right, there's no up and down directly.
So you could, in fact, have your table at the ceiling and sit at the ceiling facing downward.
Exactly. But also a table is flat on this Earth because we want to make sure that whatever you put in it doesn't fall off the table. But that's not the rule in microgravity. So is a table even flat in a station, right? Is it more like a like something you can shove your articles in, right? Instead of a flat surface.
I'm immediately thinking a spherical table, for example.
Perhaps, yeah.
Would it make sense?
Yeah. Maybe it's soft. Maybe it's spherical. Maybe there are holes in it. So if you want to put an apple on that table, you would actually shove it in and secure it in place, right? So everything is...
Because it would float away.
Exactly. Or the point of a table is to make another object accessible to you and make that object stable in space, right? So we have to come back to first principles. What is a table? What is the purpose of the table? And how would it be used in an environment that doesn't have gravity? And also the way you move around the table, right? Right now we use either chairs or our legs to move around the table. In space, you have to float around. So how do you brace yourself? How do you use your feet or your arms or other parts of your body to make that table usable for yourself? These are the kind of questions we have to answer as space architects, right? And we start a lot with assumptions, and then we're able to test it in different environments, underwater or in like parabolic flights. And then eventually, once our designs are flown, to a space station or otherwise, then we can actually see if it works.
The International Space Station, as we know it right now, has nothing to do with what you're saying right now, because this is still old school architecture. This is Terran architecture, terrestrial architecture put into space, right?
Well, the thing is that the International Space Station, even though it's been in space for like 25 years, was actually designed in the 80s, built in the 90s, launched in the early 2000s, and assembled and grown since then, right? And so essentially the architecture of the ISS is quite old in many ways. And the culture in which it was built is quite old as well. It was not wrong. It was just like the best at the time, right? It was mainly systems engineer, mechanical engineers, aerospace engineers working together to make this lab in space. So right now it looks like a lab that's been up there for 25 years with like stuff all over the walls, right? That is to be expected of that era of space station. Now we have more of an understanding of human experience, user experience, integration of technology, digital technology, physical technology, and things like that. So as we design a supportive experience in space, we think of individual behavior, we think of psychology, we think of the psychology of color, we think of culture, we think of the quality of food that people have access to. So all these things come together in a way that goes beyond, military style bare minimum survival, and then goes into more of an era of living in space or thriving in space, right? And this has implication on health and well-being, on what happens if you stay for longer amounts of time in space. Because right now, I would say the average stay aboard the International Space Station is 6 months. Usually it's like highly trained professional astronauts going up there. But then we're going to send more and more, space flight participants. You just go there for like a few days. Or when we decide to go to Mars, that's going to be 2.5, 3 years. So the implications of human behaviors and the technology that's necessary to support that are going to be vastly different.
Should we prepare for gravity in space in architecture, or is gravity in space still way down the road because we don't have it? So you're planning for the zero gravity architecture and design.
Yeah, I think we need to plan for multiple types of gravity. So artificial gravity would be wonderful down the line. It will happen at some point. We just need to go through the 20,000 steps necessary to make it happen at scale. We need to design for microgravity because that's what we know at this point. If we stay in low Earth orbit, that's likely what we're going to live with. Now, microgravity has implication on human bodies that is quite bad. You age much faster in microgravity. Like a lot of people talk about radiation in space, but radiation is actually not that big of a problem in low Earth orbit because of the protection of the Earth's magnetosphere. Now, if you go to Mars and beyond, that would be a different problem. But radiation is fine. Microgravity, however, is a huge problem, right? Like the fact that on Earth, we have evolved as humans to have gravity essentially push the majority of our blood to the bottom half of our body is something we're used to. In space, that's not how it is. The blood is evenly spread throughout the body, which means our face are bigger and our legs are very small. And, that can lead to space blindness or, some certain things happening with the vascular system in the brain, things like that. So, so we have to work for this and work very closely with, experts in space medicine. And most importantly, we have to experiment with everything because we can come up with all the theories, that we can until we test them, we actually don't know. Another type of gravity that we're going to explore very soon is partial gravity. So going on the surface of the moon or on the surface of Mars, so that's 1/6 or 1/3 of the Earth's gravity. We actually don't know what happens in the long term. We've been on the moon for like a couple days at most. That doesn't tell you anything about what it does to our bodies. So if we start having settlements on the moon and people stay there for 6 months plus, what happens to the body? Is the implication closer to what's happening in microgravity, or is it closer to what's happening on Earth? And if it's closer to what's happening on Earth and health is not as impacted as much as microgravity, perhaps we could have partial gravity space stations instead of full Earth gravity space station. And then Mars, we know nothing because we've never sent humans there. Not only is the gravity 1/3, which is, in theory sounds better than 1/6 on the moon, but being in isolation, like great distances from Earth, the fact that you can't even physically see the Earth as this big blue ball, and being physically separated from the rest of humanity, having communication between both places being delayed in ways that can be very disturbing. All of that will have implication on health, our mental health, our physical health, our social health.
What is the next step in space architecture? Because now we know we have the International Space Station. We know that's old school. What would a new space station look like? Or what will the next space station look like?
Yeah, there are multiple going up there. I mean, the Chinese space station is on orbit, right? We don't really talk about it much in the US, but it is there and it is doing very well. So that is a newer design for sure. And there are, private companies, commercial space station companies. So I mentioned VAST earlier, that's launching Haven 1 probably later this year or next year. Axiom Space, thinking about that too. And Sierra Space as well. They're thinking about launching specifically an inflatable module as a space station. What's very interesting about using inflatables is that you can actually pack a lot of that inflatable material in a rocket, and then that volume expands quite a bit in on orbit. Like for example, the type of diameters that we're thinking about there is like about 9 meters, which can host up to like 10 astronauts pretty fairly comfortably.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's like a balloon.
It's like a balloon. So it has like
does furniture inflate with it?
So that would be one of the options. And then some other options would be to have, the furniture or the equipment being flown in and then installed later, right? Because you can't have everything attached to the walls, deflated, shoved in a, payload fairing and then shoved into space. I think the vibration and the sharpness of certain materials might make it like very unsafe.
Your role is to push the boundaries, and this is a fantastic position to be in, also as an artist. Where would you want to see the boundaries pushed the most? Where are we unimaginative still?
I think people are starting to have a lot of talks on psychological health and what that implies, right? Like what would that... So far, we're like, let's create an environment that looks a little bit more like home or has like smells or colors that remind us of like something familiar. That's a great place to start. But I think with all the incredible technology that's happening right now, like with AI and with wearables and with, biofeedback and all the things related to the brain, we can actually hyper specialize and customize care that's happening to these people who are in isolation. Because when we think about long-term space travel, let's say 6+ months, we can't expect these astronauts to be the same people when they leave and when they come back.
To be not affected by all this.
Yeah. They will be affected. The day-to-day will affect them. Microgravity will affect them. Isolation will affect them. Seeing the same 5 people for the next 3 years will affect them. And so we want to make sure that instead of pre-selecting these people to be quote unquote perfect for the mission, we want to make sure that we allow humans to be humans. We all have bad days and good days. We're good at certain things. We're terrible at other things. And so creating an environment that allows people to be these imperfect humans while still making sure the mission is happening and everybody's in a safe environment is really what I would like the world to focus a little bit more on.
I think what we're training out of artificial intelligence hallucinations is exactly what we want for humans. We want to have times where we can freely ramble and speak our minds and hallucinate. I think this is part of what makes us human.
Yeah. Even the word surprise, right? Yes. Terrifying to everybody at NASA. But it's important in our lives to know that certain things that we haven't planned happened, right? Because a lot of opportunities happen that way. It helps us be creative and work together and, maybe, get away from the day-to-day, which is, mainly experiments and maintenance and making sure you don't die, right? These are very important, obviously. That's not going to go away. But we want to diversify what goes through people's experiences and these quite dangerous environments. Yeah.
But this environment literally wants to kill us all the time.
Exactly.
So
even looking out the window, right? Like here we're in a library and then we look over the city of Austin, for example. We don't see what's across the window as death. But that is the case for astronauts. It's a little bit harder to see because we have these beautiful pictures of the Earth, like rotating around it and seeing all those countries and oceans and all that. It's really easy to see the beauty of Earth. But when you're away from all of that, when you're on your way to Mars, for example, and the Earth is becoming more of a blue dot in the vastness of space, what are you going to look at? Do you look at the blackness of space and, do you find fascination in that, or do you see it as a threat? And life only exists in the confines of the space architecture that you live around.
I had a conversation here in Austin last year with Georgi Petrov, space architect, and we talked about windows, and it's very difficult to create those windows or to engineer those windows in the first place. So my question was, why do we need windows at all? Why not put a display there and see on that display whatever you want to see? See a beautiful landscape or see an ocean or whatever. Would that be a substitute to trick us into thinking that we are not in this hostile and deadly environment?
Yeah, I think a mix of the two would be ideal. I think it's important to have this analog window. Sure, it's difficult to engineer, but like engineers are pretty clever, and we've trusted.
Solved?
Yeah, well, it has been solved. We have the cupola aboard the ISS, which is honestly the favorite spots of any astronauts who's ever visited, and even a smallish company like Vast has from the first space station they're going to build are going to have a window for that specific reason. There's a psychological effect in knowing that you can see the Earth as it is, right, through a relatively thin window. And then, displays are getting more and more sophisticated, and they can trick us into believing that something is real. But the thing is that our brain need a lot more than just the visual, right? Like there's a lot of subliminal things that are happening, like distant sound that actually that we have on Earth, like a dog barking or like birds chirping in the distance that actually help kind of
a three-dimensional soundscape.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes us feel like we are where we are instead of we are in the middle of nowhere, right? And these are the types of things that psychologically we don't really think about because they're so minute. But the minute you take them away from someone's reality, that person begins to feel a little bit lost. So yeah, I'm all for the analog window, and I'm all for integrating more and more sophisticated display. But I also want to think about the emotional and multisensory aspect of why we experience the things that we do.
I'm a big fan of all things forward-looking, but considering everything that you're saying, how dangerous that is and how many problems we need to solve, the question still remains, is this a good idea? Is it a good idea to leave our planet? At the same time, I know we are built to make the next step. This is what makes us human. We've always done that. So I think we're damned to venture upward. Maybe we shouldn't say it in that negative way.
I was about to say, that sentence could be turned something positive.
Yeah.
The opportunity of exploring outside of what we've known so far as humanity, which is the confines of the Earth, is interesting, right? There was a time not long ago where you never ventured out of your city or your state or your country. And now it's pretty common for people to do that, to explore all of these different cultures, to taste their food and to live with them, right? And so there's an opening of people's consciousness and curiosity and innovation that happens with all of that. So imagine what happens when space opens its door to more of us, right? It happened very much with aviation as well, right? Like it's very easy to take aviation for granted or think that you live a life that is separated from that innovation. But the reason why we're here is because we flew here, right? The reason there's commerce between different countries is the same thing. So there are many different, intricate parts of life and the way the world functions that is based on these big industries like aviation. And now what's coming up with space, and space is going to be exponentially larger. In ways that we haven't thought about yet, that I find fascinating. And that point actually about these ideas that we haven't thought about yet is very interesting because so far we have relied on space agencies and governments and commercial space companies to come up with the ideas of we should do this because that's how we're going to make money. That's how we're going to have a strong defense for XYZ country. But when we start inviting more people from outside the space industry, from outside of space countries, the typical US, Europe, Russia, and all that. When we talk to people from South America or from, Southeast Asia or from Sub-Saharan Africa, and they have ideas about what it means to go outside of the confines of the Earth, that's where a lot of very interesting ideas come up, right? And you can see I see a lot of parallel what's going on in space right now with the history of medicine. For a long time we have like forced medicine to be this like ultra empirical practice, the scientific methods and then testing things like double blind, blah, blah, blah. And we have done a lot of advancements when it comes to that. But that advancement also negates a lot of like how the body actually works, right? And so that's why some, hardcore scientific people, researchers and doctors today are coming back to ancient medicine and understanding how, like the energy system in the body that was discovered, I don't know, 3,000 years ago, how that relates to the science of today and like full circle, right? And so I want the future of space or the present and the future of space to really think about, okay, we look to the future and this is what we need from a power systems standpoint, from a psychological system standpoint, all those things. But I also want to refer to the past, thousands of years ago when people were dreaming about the stars, what was the motivation? What did they see in this? And what does it mean to get outside of the natural world that we know and explore, right? And there are some philosophical, wonderful stories that could come out of it, but also innovation when it comes to making that space architecture we're going to live in a lot more meaningful for us humans.
Do you see this happening somewhere already? That those worlds collide and flow into one another?
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in like talking to different people in different parts of the world, and I was having this conversation a couple of years ago with some high school students in Chile, for example, and they were like very curious about space, and they were like, oh, we have this like long lost tradition of growing potatoes at super high altitude when there's almost no oxygen. And I'm like, well, that sounds very much like Mars, right? Is there anything that we can learn from this long tradition that was based on survival of these people living at high altitude? Is there anything from that we can transfer to space environments and make the resilience of food systems possible on places like Mars?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I think in general, it's no secret that we have lost or ignored lots of our human culture we have built over the past millennia and thousands upon thousands of years. We live in a very, very mind-driven pocket in time that's very young still. The Western culture is very young.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a lot we can still learn, as you say, on Earth. There's so much we can learn. We have all the medicine, and we have how we build things, how we live in cohabitation with different species and whatnot. So I think we're, in this respect, still rather simple minds.
Sure.
Although we think we are the culprit, and we are the epitome of evolution.
I think everybody in every culture thinks they're the top of the food chain, I guess. But yeah, no, there are good things about the new stuff. The fact that we are trying to like prove the efficacy or charlatanism of certain concepts, I think is very healthy. But you can't shut things down just because they sound like they are in opposition with the status quo today, right? I think one thing we're sure about as humanity is that we don't know a lot of things, right? And one thing as a scientist that we have to accept is that very few things are 100% right or 100% wrong, right? And so coming in with this humility in front of like certain concept is going to be important. And that's why I love this era of space, because when I started in the space industry 20 years ago, it was still very engineering driven, science driven, which, is fantastic. We had to start somewhere. Very, the astronauts were like highly trained, like ex-military, PhD, this and that. And again, made sense for that time. But now we are involving more of, the soft and less measurable aspects of humans. And so that's why designers and architects have a role to play that is quite important, right? Because we understand the balance between The function of things, keeping people alive is quite important. We're not going to bypass that one. But is the function more than that, right? We also have to think about the aesthetics of things, because for a long time, in every like engineering forward like industries, they always think of aesthetic as a nice to have, but they don't understand that aesthetics actually has an impact on our psychological health, on information hierarchy, and on the efficiency of missions. So we have to think about that too. And then the third thing, which is more prominent now that we're in a commercial economy, is the value of things. What kind of economic value does that have? What kind of value to humanity does that have? What kind of value to the way we innovate to, optimize our, use of water, use of like resources and power and things like this, so we can bring it back to Earth, right? So as designers and architects, we think about the balance of these three, of function, aesthetics, and value, and we make sure that any decision that we make balances these three things. And we may talk to, certain engineers that fully focus on function, is very good at that, or like flight surgeons or space doctors who really focus on keeping people alive. But really, is the balance of these three, and making sure that whatever solution we come up with is holistic and personalized at the same time, is what we offer future flight participants.
I like that. Where is AI in all of this? Because it seems like AI is everywhere, and
yes,
and invading even the remotest corners of culture and our humanity. Where do you see
AI is very, very useful in, I would say, hyper-personalization of systems, whether it's physical system or software systems, right? For a long time, we had created a lot of average products, an average pair of headphones or an average chair, and it only fits like the peak of the bell curve of human ergonomics, and which is usually middle-aged white male from the West.
Yes,
and a lot of us are not that, right? So it doesn't necessarily fit, and because of manufacturing and the limitations of cost, the adjustment of all of these hardware solutions were very limited. And so once we integrate AI, we can make sure that every single person at a very specific point in time gets what they need, right? There's a kind of like a feedback loop between sensors around us and what I would call stimulators, right? The sensors that are catching up our mood, our heart rate variability, our heart rate, our temperature, all the things that our EEG, like brain waves activity. So having that information feeds into the AI machine and then gives us what we need when we need it. And simulation can be the architecture itself, right? Like how is it designed and is it conducive to health and well-being? And then you can have like customization of the light, the color of the light, right? As humans, we're used to the circadian rhythm, day and night. There's the colors of the morning, the colors of the sunset, what happens in the middle of the day, what happens throughout the year when we're used to seasons, right? Are there artificial ways to bring that back in that fully artificial environment to ground the people going up to space? And grounding is a very interesting concept, especially when there's no ground, right? So what does grounding mean, right? Because some people talk about grounding when it comes to meditation or like yoga or other types of practices that really recenter us and make sure that we're not freaking out at the next episode of something happening. But grounding, and that's a question I've been asking myself, like how do you ground people when there's no ground, right? Like do you do that with that hyper-personalized environment that can be supported by AI? Do you do it with certain imagery, like for example, the imagery of the Earth and how beautiful it is, or the imagery of the people that we love, and communicating with them, whether they're actually there or they're like an AI talking to you? All of that are things that we know very little about because we haven't tested them. So I'm very, very excited about the next, I would say decade or two, where we're going to experiment a lot and get a lot of answers.
It's fantastic. Maybe it's all about also finding that ground within. Ground. If there's no like physical ground on the outside, maybe you should look on the inside, and maybe meditation should be a part of our daily, whatever we do all day long in space, our daily routine.
Well, meditation, the thing is, it works for some people, it doesn't work for others, right? Like one of the many jobs that I have is I teach creativity and innovation to police departments within the US. And I can't walk in a room and start using the word meditation. Like half of the police department would just shut me down, right? And stop listening to me. And so I was actually taught to use expressions like tactical breathing. Right. It says this.
Breathing.
Yes, it says the same thing.
Makes me more stronger.
But in the culture of police department, that is acceptable.
Nice.
Right. So, and language is so incredibly important. You know, in space, typically you have to know, you know, English and Russian at this point. Depending on the space station, you might have to know Chinese. And then, you know, everybody brings the culture and the subtlety of use of language when we go anywhere, including space. So how can we kind of like open all of that as well to bring a lot more authenticity and a lot more like customization of the space and the dialogues that are happening in those environments by using precise language, right? One of the things, for example, when it comes to like social and psychological health, you have to be very precise with the way you describe your emotions and how you feel, right? Like nonviolent communication is like, that's what they teach. So how are you going to be very precise in your language if the language is not fluent to you, right? Perhaps technology can help you with that. Perhaps subliminal, like non-verbal ways of expressing your emotions can help you with that. I don't have answers at this point, but I think these are the types of areas that at some point need to be explored and turned into, you know, positive ways of creating these environments.
Do you think the folks who will be living in space in the future are still, of course, there's the same species, Homo sapiens, but will they evolve into something different? Because
most likely
we're made for Earth.
Exactly.
Earth has given birth to us.
Yeah.
So if we're like living for hundreds of years in a different space, this is something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've seen the series The Expanse, you actually see the differences. You know, people who grew up on Mars versus people who grew up on Earth, and that's a wonderful way to extrapolate what might happen. Now, in reality, we actually don't know. You know, people who grew up on Mars might use oxygen and, you know, bone density and all that the same way as we do. We don't know. Theoretically, it might be different, right? And so, so really thinking about how evolution happens. Like evolution naturally happens very slowly. The environment changes, and you know, it takes a million years or so for something to change radically in a species. Based on how fast we want to reach the moon and Mars and like deep space, we'll have to evolve a lot faster than that. And so there are talks about, you know, pre-selecting certain types of people to go up there who might have like higher levels of resilience when it comes to certain aspects of life, like radiation or whatever. So that's number one. We can also look at epigenetics, right? Like the expression of certain genes that change based on the environment. There are also, you know, biological changes that we can we can talk about if you want to go full sci-fi. You know, changing certain limbs to adapt to different gravities, for example. I don't know what that looks like at this point because we don't know what the needs are specifically, but perhaps that's possible. You know, there are a lot of experiments right now in bioprinting organs in space because it's possible to do it in microgravity and very difficult to do it on Earth. Because on Earth, you would have to have like scaffold in the 3D printing, and it makes it very difficult to print entire organs, for example. So we're doing, they are doing, I'm not doing it, a lot of that in space right now. And so what if we engineered, you know, space hearts, let's call them, you know, that are not designed to function on Earth. Our heart has a structure and a geometry that works because,
of gravity.
It helps the blood circulate throughout the whole body the way it is designed for this Earth. But maybe in microgravity, you would need a rounder heart, right? Because then maybe it pumps differently, or, I don't know, that's, again, all theory and all sci-fi. But perhaps we could engineer space organs for long-term space dwellers that help us catch up on human evolution in a way that doesn't shorten our lifespan and allows us to do the things that we do, like exploring, the edge of the solar system, for example.
That's a crazy thought, but it's not. I think it's not that far away.
Yeah,
because we are tweaking ourselves, our bodies.
Yeah.
So I think it's not that far off, because we know how to replace hearts. I think surgery is pretty far advanced
on Earth, because cauterizing and using gravity to make sure that you don't bleed off is something we take advantage on this Earth. Open surgery is not really a thing up there. We know how to close wounds, but open heart surgery is going to take probably a few more decades. But it has to happen at some point, right? There's certain big questions about the future of humanity we have to put on the table at some point, growing a fetus. Do we do that? Do we do that ethically?
Start with conception. That's the first problem that's completely unsolved.
Yeah, because we don't know. We haven't tried, right? And who tries first and under which conditions? Is it ethically okay? And what do we do with it, right? So conception, even conception, just having sex. People have, this weird taboo about having sex in space, as if nobody has done it. Let's be real.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, and then conception, and then, growth of a embryo to the fetus to birth, are the advantages to it? We don't know. Is the fetus even going to develop normally? We have absolutely no idea. Does it make sense to grow a baby inside of a woman's womb? Or does it make sense to use technology like ectogenesis, which is basically a bag with the embryo fetus growing in it?
That's impossible to mess with. I mean, not even one embryo can be experimented on. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, I think cloning on Earth, we're going to start with small organism, and then we're going to go into mammals, and then eventually someone somewhere is going to try it on humans, right? So I think it's just a matter of time and a matter of ethical alignment and understanding if it makes sense. And of course, the economic side of things is going to play a role as well. But right now, I don't think a lot of people have any motivation to do that today, but that might change in 20 years and we don't know, right? And this is the kind of research that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take quite a few decades in the push-pull between scientific advancement, like engineering possibility, financial possibility, and the motivation of humanity as a whole.
Some people keep asking the question, why do we have to do all this? Why do we need this? Why space? We have so many problems on Earth. Rightly so. Good question. But again, it's not this or that. It's this and that.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
So what's your message to those folks?
So number one, nobody wants to leave Earth forever. Like some of us are going to stay here. I think the vast majority of people alive today will not leave. So we agree on that. The other thing that's pretty interesting, especially as a space architect, is that rethinking how we live healthily, designing for space forces us to break everything down to first principle. Who are we as a species? What does it mean to explore? What kind of innovation do we need to invent in order to make that possible? And that helps us accelerate, all the inventions and innovation that are being created right now. And a lot of these are not going to make money in space, right? Like a lot of people think that, oh, you're going to, invent all those things in space and you're just going to die there. No, there are like many other applications. You actually make money by you're creating like dual use innovation, things developed for the military, for space environments that are dual use for Earth, right? You turn them into businesses, these businesses flourish, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and there are many examples of that in the past, solar panels, for example, water filtration systems. We don't think about it when we turn on the tap and are able to drink the water, but that was kind of like an invention that was refined by necessity because we couldn't send humans to space without that system, right? Wireless communication devices, when we talk, on Zoom calls or, talking to our family on our phones, these are technologies that were necessary for us to invent many decades ago, and we're able to miniaturize and reduce the cost and make it available to everyone. So once we open the space economy to more people and make living in space a lot more like welcoming to everyone, many more of these innovations and technologies are going to appear. And there are certain big problems that we need to solve on this planet. One is climate change. Two is like the health and well-being of humans and how we treat the natural world. I believe that all of that can actually be helped by the methodologies we use in solving for space. Right?
One problem still remains, that's the human software. That's
the human software?
The human software.
Okay.
So this brought us into the mess and into also, of course, all those cultural achievements we have. So it's not only that, but currently it seems like we're in a mess as a species because there's so many issues we have run ourselves into. So is the human software also of interest for a space architect?
Yes, absolutely. And, let's forget about space for a second. What's going on with the human software is that humans have evolved to be a certain way where we live and we thrive in certain environments that we've created for ourselves. And then technology is doing wonderful things for us, right? Like making life a lot more efficient and fun and all those things. But it's also overwhelmed the way our brain works, right? We have all the choices in the world at all times, anywhere in the world. And so because of that, we don't experience natural things like, boredom or the fact that our communities are smaller and we can have very deep relationships. Now we have relationships with people across the world that are not necessarily superficial, right? And so this difference in how we as humans adapt to the environment we've created artificially is, I would say, at the root of a lot of what's wrong in this world today, right? And it's not like it's inherently wrong. It's just that we haven't adapted to it, right? And so when we think about living in space or exploring farther in the solar system, like how do we take that and how do we, adapt to this like other level of otherness of things that we are not evolved to be comfortable in. And so we continue to invent new ways of adapting to it by making ourselves feel more comfortable, creating environments that are a little bit more familiar, re-injecting culture where culture doesn't exist. So that's where designers, creators of all kind, like try to do, but that's always in opposition to the engineering and the financial decisions that are being made, right? And so I think this push-pull of like, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And most importantly, why are we doing it? That is the kind of questions that, feels like space policy need to be thinking about pretty hard, right?
I'd love to see a Blue Origin, a SpaceX for astronauts, because they're about the rockets, they're about the buildings and the infrastructure. But I'd love to see the same effort also for the humans, how to evolve ourselves. And maybe that could be a fantastical blueprint for the rest of us down here on Earth.
I mean, what they're doing is that they're enabling other experts in the human software and the human health and well-being to do that, by sending, astronauts on their rockets, by creating space stations that can create environments for experiments on humans and experiments, that are being flown up there. So I think we'll need a little bit of everything. And I love the fact that there are many, smaller companies that are burgeoning in biotech or in pharmaceuticals and, robotics and other types of technologies that are piggybacking on these like rocket companies that you call them, in order to make this happen. Like universities from all over the world that's sending experiments in like CubeSats. Isn't that incredible, right? Like 20, 30 years ago, it was like very hard to do.
Because now it's affordable.
It is affordable, and there are like, like systems put in place that make it possible for people to do that safely, right? And I love the idea of having like countries that, in the West we consider as, poor or not having the resources possible to go to space, to dream and know that in their lifetime something's going to happen in their own country, right? It can start small, like, borrowing a neighboring country's, remote sensing satellite to get information about agriculture, for example. You can start there, right? As a country. I've actually visited Nigeria last year and visited the NICOMSAT. So they're working with the Chinese and, getting a lot of information in agriculture doing that way. So, and they're doing a lot of research next door on human health as well. So they're starting small, and then eventually they're going to build an entire culture within the country that strives to know more about all of that. And what I love about having multiple countries doing that is that they're all going to have their own flavor of what's important to them culturally, right? Certain countries are going to care very much about, power consumption and cleanliness of water. Other people are going to be interested in food and culture. Other countries are going to be interested in like, how do we make it as low cost as possible so the farmer who lives off of like $10 a month can actually benefit from it. So that diversity of why space and why for everyone on this planet is so incredibly important right now and interesting.
You're a very inspiring person.
Thank you.
Are we going to make it through that filter?
Through the
filter, the grand filter of technological advanced civilizations, making it into not destroying themselves. So there's this theory of a great filter any technological civilization needs to go through. And there's always the risk that there's a certain point for technological civilizations to at some point destroy themselves.
Yeah. It's not if, it's when, right? It will happen at some point. Now, is it going to happen in a lifetime? I don't know. I don't think so. I think we have, at the same time as a lot of bad things are happening, we're also learning a lot about human resilience and about the resilience of systems that we're inventing. Because we are a very global species now, there's a lot of checking in, when something is going the wrong way, you have a lot of alarms going up. And I think that's very healthy to have societies that allow for that to happen. Now, we need to continue living in, democracies or types of like political systems that allow for these red flags to be flown. So the right people at the right time can prevent disasters from happening. But back in the day, whoever has power was the government and the people, not so much, right? And now, because of, the entrepreneurial spirits and different centers around the world that allows for like individuals to come up with these grand ideas that they can develop in a number of years, allows for these guardrails to be put in place and for innovation to be to happen. And for ideas to be tested quickly, right? And it's important to test ideas quickly because all ideas start with assumptions. The world wants this, I can offer this, therefore it's going to be successful. That's an assumption, right? That every entrepreneur thinks about. But the only way you can validate assumptions is to make sure that one, you test it thoroughly, and two, that you happen to do it at the right place at the right time, right? And so So yeah, it's pretty exciting on Earth and in space how the entrepreneurial spirit is accelerating all of that and also checking the balances at the same time.
Would you go into space if the call came?
Yes, but I would go to space for a very specific reason. I'm not the kind of person who grew up dreaming of going to space, and I thought it was fascinating, but I always saw space as a very uncomfortable environment, which is probably why I'm a space architect. That my motivation was, how do we fix this? So if I'm invited to go to space, I would like to actually fix it, right? I would like to go in with a bunch of equipment and drill and things like that. I would like to transform, an ISS-looking environment, which is honestly a mess, into this health and well-being supporting environment, integrating the beautiful colors of light and, like plants, technology that is supportive of people's needs day in, day out, communication devices that help with that, like sound systems that don't, overwhelm you every day, toilets that function, all those things, all those problems that, we've accepted as good enough. I would like to make them exceptional. To me, the future of space architecture has the potential of almost being better than the way we design homes on Earth, right? We don't really think that far because right now going to space is so expensive and so complex, and all the levels of TRL that you have to climb are take a lot of time and brains to go through. But if we really think about the North Star, what do we want space architecture to be? I want humanity to be comfortable and supported wherever we live, whether it's microgravity, partial gravity, nowhere in space, going on a 1,000 year trajectory in deep space, or staying on Earth, or even being underwater, right? Anywhere we live should support us, and design, technology, and the cleverness of humanity can get us there.
There's a question I keep asking every guest on this show.
Yes.
That question is, if you go to space, it's usually a very boring journey because of the vast distances. So to keep yourself sane and healthy, what's the one piece of music you would want to bring in your playlist? Because we have a Spotify playlist for the aspiring space traveler. What's your piece?
Oh, wow.
Whatever kind of music you want to pick.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. I'm going through a bunch of albums and artists and all that right now. I'd have to think about it.
Take your time.
I'm actually a big Björk fan. And she had an album that came out a few years ago called Biophilia. And it's
love it.
Yeah, and it's an album where each song goes after an aspect of the natural world, like the crystal world, or other types of living world. And I think it almost feels like you are among nature when you listen to that album. And I think one of the things that you are going to miss the most is being surrounded by what we call nature, even though space is nature. Like the air around us, the crystals that grow in the ground, or the trees, or even other humans. Having a sound representation of that in the way she writes music, and the way she interprets music, and the way the musicians work around her, I think would be wonderful.
What's the one tune from Biophilia?
Oh gosh, I can't remember the titles.
Because you can only bring one, or do you want me to pick one?
Yeah, sure.
I pick one for you. Okay?
Yeah.
But you need to then live with it on your voyage in space.
Yeah.
So that's the one I'll be picking for you.
Okay. Sounds good.
The show is called the Space Cafe Podcast. It's a coffee place, and now and then you go into coffee places to energize yourself by having a strong coffee. Now I challenge you to share an espresso for the mind with us, with the audience. What could be a shot of inspiration you would like to share with me, with the audience, from whatever walk of life or topic you want to pick it from?
Yeah, sure. if the subject of space architecture is interesting to you, or the subject of humans in space, I would do some research on Tsiolkovsky. I can't remember his first name, like Vladimir or something like that. He's a guy who lived in the late 1800s in nowhere Siberia. Lived in like a one-room tiny shack with like his whole like 15 people family. He was a teacher who was, I believe, deaf, and he is, as we know, the first person to draw how humans will live in space.
Oh.
Yeah. And so you can see his drawing in the weirdest museum I've ever been to, called the Museum of Jurassic Technology in Los Angeles, California. It's a very, very strange place, but I absolutely recommend you go there. And you can see originals of his drawings.
Wow.
And you can see like space capsule and people floating around. Imagine like late 1800s drawings. And yeah, he wrote a lot in his journals about like how he imagined life in space being. And this is like before we've ever sent anything up there. So discovering him was quite life-changing for me. And I hope it does that to other people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
What we build out there is who we become as humans. This is one of the key moments I'm taking away from that conversation. I'm very grateful to have sat down with Panam, with this prominent figure in space architecture, to talk about who we will become. Because space architecture is not just about building for the void, it's about building for our own souls. And this is what drives me crazy, and at the same time what inspires me deeply, that we live in that pocket in time like never before in human history, where we are reshaping everything we have taken for granted and framing it into something essentially new. How great can that be? Of course, we live in a very friction-laden moment in time, but I deeply believe that we're headed for a fantastic future. So, my friends, if you are taking value from that conversation, consider giving it to someone who you think could take value from it as well. Send a link as a surprise gift, or recommend it to someone whenever you meet that person. That would really mean a lot to me. And well, of course, if you have time, give our show a rating or two, or a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And thanks for your loyalty. This is truly appreciated, seriously, from the bottom of my heart. I talk to you in 2 weeks from now. Looking forward to it. Bye-bye.